It begins as an ordinary morning for the 100,000 plus inhabitants of a densely populated informal settlement in the east of Nairobi. Residents in their thousands are rushing to work, others returning from night shift, wading through the slimy mud. Without a warning, a huge fire explosion rocks the neighborhood, killing over 100 people, leaving 120 others with third-degree burns and up to 400 families homeless. First responders begin a desperate rescue operation in one of the worst fire disasters ever witnessed in Kenya.
The efforts of searching for more bodies continues today. As at yesterday, we had recovered 76 bodies, and those ones were all burnt beyond recognition.
Pamela Indiaka was tasked with coordination of rescue operations by the Kenya Red Cross.
The magnitude of the disaster was very shocking because you're meeting people who are literally without their skin. They were really burnt.
This is Sinai slum, one of a belt of slums collectively called Mukuru that run along the length of Nairobi's industrial area. Like any other informal settlement, the sights that greet you are open sewers, low dangling cables of illegally connected electricity, leaking water pipes and industrial waste lines changing color ever so often, out of sight, out of mind, until the unthinkable happens. Almost 4 years after the Sinai fire tragedy, we turn our cameras back on the infamous paths and trenches, those that let loose the floodgates of hell, death, pain, and desperation. How did so many people die in such a short time? What could have been done differently? And after 3 years of reflection and reconstruction, are the residents feeling any safer? And why would anyone choose to remain in this valley of death? September 12, 2011, several hours before dawn, the air above Sinai was acrid with the smell of petrol, and residents, alive to the slightest opportunity to make an extra coin, could already follow the smell to the source. The black market for fuel is robust here, the major source being the tankers waiting in line outside the Kenya Pipeline Company gate for their turn to fill up for the next delivery. These are empty tanks, but not completely dry, so the dealers will always try to siphon the remains. But that night, there was a different source. An industrial accident at the State Oil Corporation Kenya Pipeline Company had channeled a large amount of unleaded petrol into a stormwater drainage system. According to an internal report by KPC, a gasket, which is a seal used to join 2 or more pipes, failed under pressure, causing a leak. The gasket was near a storm drain, so fuel gushed out of the pipeline and into the storm drain, which carried it all the way into the slum in nearby Ngong River. What came through was a river of petrol, according to George Njoroge, a resident and survivor of the Sinai fire tragedy.
Wingi ya mafuta venye ilikuwa hapo, unaona saa hiyo lea ya maji. Mafuta ilikuwa kaa size ya hiyo gunia. Hapo pa kuwa ati maji ndio mingi, mafuta ndio mingi kuliko maji. Tuko ile muda nimekaa hapa. Nimekwambia mimi nimekaa hapa. Ndio hii nyumba yangu hapa, ndio mtaro. Ile mafuta ilipita hiyo siku, haijaipita. Unaona? Hujaipita mafuta ingine kama hii. Hata kama kulikuwa kunapita mafuta, hiyo ilikuwa ngaa imezidi. Unaona? Imezidi.
It was deep enough. One could easily dip a bucket into it. The spill went for hours, and slum villagers who saw an opportunity to make quick bucks drew fuel undisturbed, knee-deep, from right inside the drainage. But it is what appeared to be their luck which was also their undoing. Minutes before 10 a.m., the fuel burst into a huge fireball, an explosion that was heard 3 kilometers away. For the hundreds who had their heads buried in the scooping of petrol, there was no time to escape. Fire engulfed them, and in a moment, bodies were strewn all over, in various postures of agony, burnt to the bone. The fire raged on, snaking through the neighborhood, from the drainage into the river, and burning everything in between over a stretch of 300 meters plus. Women and children in the houses and various people going about their businesses in the area fell victims to circumstances. Any visitor in Sinai will quickly point out that nothing has changed since the incident. Today, more than 3 years on, victims are still waiting for justice. No compensation has been done, and survivors living with the effects of the fire pay for their own treatment expenses. But that is all superficial. To the people of Sinai, everything has changed, and while they are healed or healing on the outside, a lot of them are dying inside. Rebecca Ndeta, who was living just a few meters from the drainage line, nearly lost her life trying to save her child.
Sasa mtoi venye alianza kulia na mimi nikacheza manguo nikasamata nirudi kwa nyumba chukue mtoto nimnyonyeshe. Kurudi kwa nyumba unajua sikuwa najua kenye kinaendelea kwa sababu ilikuwa asubuhi na mvua ilikuwa inanyesha. Sasa kurudi hivyo kwa nyumba kuchukua mtoto ni mbebe ndivyo nilisikia nje kumelipuka. Sasa kumwekelea hivi kwa kiti nitoke nje niangalie kwani kunaendaje huku nje. Kutoka nje nilikutana na moto. Ishafika. Sasa ya kuingia kwa nyumba nitoe mtoto ndivyo sasa ilitufesi hivyo na mtoto na ikatuangusha chini. Kujisikia nilijisikia nikiwa hosi. Sielewi kenye kilifuata sasa.
Baby Marion was only 14 months old then. Unfortunately, that's all the time she had on earth. She died later that night, even before her mother gained full consciousness.
Ndio alilemewa akakufa usiku. Hiyo siku hata kesho yake. Mtoto aliweza kuaga. But mama yake hata yeye alikuwa mbaya. Hata sasa mimi nilikuwa na kibarua utaenda huko juu kwa nini juu gorofa ukaone mgonjwa. Haya chini kuna mocha hii. Utapita ukiona mtu hiyo kwenda kwa nyumba. Na ni watu wenye liwacha nyuma kama saa ngapi? 3. Lakini ulikuja ukapata hawako mahali waacha. Na hivyo ndio niweza kuluzi kila kitu yangu. Isipokuwa tu bibi ndio mwenyewe. Yeye ndio mwenyewe nibaki na yeye.
In fact, Rebecca never had the chance to bury her daughter, and with the house having burnt down with everything, including all family photos, all she has of her firstborn is memories. Her husband lost his job a few weeks later for staying away from duty too long while taking care of his sick wife.
Nimewacha mgonjwa wangu kwa limba. Mtoto yako mocha hiyo. Sasa mimi kutoka Gausi after 1 month ndio tukakam likaga na hizo vigonjwa hizo vidonda miezi karibu 5. Ndio zenye mimi nilizokaa kwa nyumba mpaka nimshughulikie mpaka nimoshe angeweza kufanya kitu yote. Alikuwa na ushalalaga mocha hii. Ani vidonda zilikuwa zinanuka mpaka mimi mwenyewe nilikubali kuvumilia. Na siku mwacha atija amechomeka juu amechomeka mimi na yeye.
Sasa hebu niambie mtu kama wewe. Wewe ni kijana mzuri sana. Huyu bwana wangu akanikataa sasa, unaweza nipenda? Vile nakaa hivi. Huwezi nipenda? Utaangalia utaona huyu mama anakaa aje. Na nilikuanga mrembo. Hata ningekuonyesha picha yangu. Na saa hii hauwezi kubali. Lakini juu huyu nilichomeka nikiwa naye hizi nikataa. Juu aliniona wakati nilikuanga smart. Lakini saa hii ukiniangalia huwezi sema mimi ni smart. Na tena siwezi jihesabia kwa wale watu wa smart. Siwezi.
Rebecca's experience has made her less sociable. She stays in the house most of the time, struggling with the thought that maybe she's not pretty enough for the public eye. A better world exists only in her imaginations. She is, however, very grateful for the kind of a man that her husband is, her biggest support.
Huko Kenyatta Sisi tukaambiwa wagonjwa wenu ile kitu inawaua ni ile wamechomeka na ndani. Juu tunatibu lakini ndani hatuwezi tibu. Hata hao wenyewe manguo zao zilibaki hapa juu walichomeka manguo zika. Hata mimi niliona na uchungu sana hiyo maisha, but nilizidi kujipatia moyo mpaka wa leo.
Joseph Mwai was asleep when calamity visited the slum. He was woken up by a friend who saw his door half open and just stopped by to see if anyone was inside. What followed was a struggle to get out of the mess. The raging fire had caught up with them. Thick cloud of dark smoke made visibility and respiration difficult in the narrow paths as everybody squeezed to escape.
Nyumba zilikuwa zimefika hapa. Na moto ilifika mpaka hapa. Hizi nyumba zote zilikuwa na watu na zilichomeka.
Hizi zilisurvive aje ama zilikuwa?
Hii ni nyumba ya matope. Najua nyumba ya matope kushika moto ni shida, haiwezi shika moto.
Nyumba zilikuwa time ifike hapa watu walikuwa
watu walikuwa wamesaja sana. Hizi zote zilichomeka kuanzia pale, teremka hivyo chini mpaka huko kulikuwa na nyumba pale. Hapa ndio kulikuwa kwangu. Room 6, aka room 2 na kodesha.
By the time Mwai was out, he had lost all his clothes with serious burns all over his body. He stood stark naked, waiting for the next ambulance. And because schools nearby had closed and children were being led to safety, it did not take long before Mwai came face to face with his then 7-year-old daughter, Jen Mudhoni.
Tola hapa kwa nyumba nikapitishwa kwa barabara. Mtoto wangu tulikutana yeye pale, mimi nikiwa uchi sina nguo.
Na yeye ametoka shule.
Yeye ametoka shule, ni kwanza kulia na kuingia kwa shosho yake.
Hakuongea.
Imagine mtoto wangu akiniona uchi yangu. Sio kupenda kwangu ni kitu imenikuta.
Beyond the difficulty of life without a job and the pain of lost property, Mwai's biggest loss to date is that of his dignity, that a father stood helpless and naked, looking eye to eye with his daughter. His second daughter, Teresia Njeri, 3 years old, was not born then, but her experience in the mother's womb when she heard the news of her husband's tragedy has left little Teresia with an eye problem that requires a surgery to fix. The family still cannot afford the 35,000 shillings that the doctors are asking for. Among the people I purposed to interview in this film was Francis Mumo, a man who had a strong battle with burns sustained in this fire and even returned home to help his family pick up the pieces after losing property and spending all their savings on his treatment. He was a strong champion of justice for the victims and their families and was even made vice chairman of the Sinai Fire Victims Association. But he succumbed to injuries of internal tissues caused by the fire just 1 week before we commenced filming. His wife and children have had to very rapidly open different chapters in their lives, having to cope with various shades of misfortune.
Mzee ndio alikuwa tegemeo, yeye ndio alikuwa anategemewa na watoto, school fees, chakula, kila kitu. Sasa ilibidi tu nimshike mkono niendelee tu kujifunza hiyo kazi. Kutoka wakati huo niliwacha biashara yangu yenye nilikuwa nafanya mahali nyingine, nikarudi kwa ile kazi mzee alikuwa anafanya. Sasa umasikini ukaanza kutuandama, shida za school fees, hakika nimeathirika kabisa. Hata wakati huo aliweza kuchomeka, shida ya mandawa. Kabisa hii moto hata sitakangi kufikiria mambo yake. Imeathiri familia yangu sana, imeleta umaskini hata kwa majirani.
Listening to survivor stories in Sinai paints a grim picture of the true position of slum dwellers in our society. An anonymous lot. A simple statistic, perhaps. But it's not too late to ask ourselves the important questions. For example, how is it that action has not been taken against the Kenya Pipeline Company for failing to put in place prerequisite spill containment measures at their facility to prevent petroleum products from spilling into surface runoff drains? Environmental Impact Assessment and Environmental Audit Regulations of 2003 obligate all petroleum handling facilities to undertake environmental impact assessments for new facilities and annual environmental audits for existing facilities. If KPC had done this, they could have been able to establish in good time the status of their pipes, and the disaster may have been averted. These assessments further guide mitigation measures put in place by factories and industrial facilities to handle the risk of pollution which may rise from leaks and spills, as well as system failures.
We have regulatory agencies in these countries, and these regulatory agencies need to play their role, because you find, most of these industries that are along those lines discharging waste, and those areas are ignored. Proper waste disposal, some of those areas, basically, if the regulatory agencies are not playing their role, then you find that those are areas that end up being inhabited, and you ask yourself, how did a slum come up there? Where were we in terms of our law enforcement? If it is a power line, where were we when those slums were coming up? So
interviews we did just after the Sinai incident confirmed that it was not the first time petroleum products were let into runoff drains. Well, today we know that it was not the last time either.
Mafuta uanga inateremka hapo na watu wanachota venye tu haijawahi patikana, yani kisa kama hicho hakijawahi patikana hapo tena.
Kuna drainage system, na hiyo drainage system ya Kenya Pipeline ndio mbovu, sababu sio mara ya kwanza ama sio mara ya pili kuachilia mafuta. Wanaachilianga, sengine unapata wameachilia crude oil, diesel, lakini sasa hii wakati ndio waliharibu wakaleta super.
Na bado tutabeba tu hii ndoo na hii mafuta tuipeleke kwa kotini, watu waambie mali mafuta inatokaga juu sisi hakuna mali tunasikananga na pipeline.
What all this means is that the Kenya Pipeline Company has done little or nothing over the past 3 years to prevent another fire disaster and control pollution from leaks and spills. And as we learned from locals, black market fuel dealers and casuals at Kenya Pipeline Company are usually the first to troop to the open drain every time there is a spill. So, could this be a deliberate action for the benefit of a few individuals? George Njoroge lost 2 children in the inferno, and subsequently his marriage at the height of the pressure of the disaster as they struggle to rise from the rubble. He tells me he has never felt safe in this neighborhood. And so I ask what in his view is the most urgent need of Sinai residents. He takes me back to the drain to show me a little stretch that needs to be joined, and for a moment I wonder why it's taking the county government of Nairobi so long to fix less than 10 meters of drainage that caused the death of over 100 people.
Kwa sahi pakatokea hiyo mkasa, panaweza dedi zaidi hata wale kwa kuwa kitu moja. Mali paliletanga ile mkasa pakushughulikia hapo. Unaona? Pakushughulikia hapo. Juu kama ile mtaro ingeweza kushughulikia shikanisho na nyingine. Hata mtu yeye akicheza hapa, haizi kuwa anacheza hapa na wasiwasi. Mkajua hapa, haizi kuwa anakaa hapa na wasiwasi. Ndio hata bado murudi kwa ile gavana yuliza. Ile kitu tuambia slum upgrade. Kwani huku kutakuja upgrade wa meka gani? ama wakati gani?
George is one of the residents who had houses right at the edge of this drain. Almost a year before the disaster, they were compensated to relocate and make way for proper fixing of the drainage that would see it all covered and redirected to the main drain. They moved and construction started shortly after. What followed was inappropriate materials and then the project stalled. 4 years on, not even the blood of 130 people was enough to redeem it.
Again, in terms of issues of corruption and whether they retard our development in the informal settlements, you also cannot rule it out. Because in the first place, it was even illegal to put up houses there. Where were we? We should have enforced the law. It was even wrong that the fuel drainage system was linked to the water drainage system. That was not supposed to be. Where were the law enforcement agencies at that time? You know, that we all know that it's not correct. So I think that the different agencies charged with the responsibilities need to take responsibility and deliver their mandate to conclusion.
Just hours after the Sinai disaster, various leaders visited the scene and hospitals, including then Prime Minister Raila Odinga, today the opposition leader, Energy Minister Kiraitu Murungi, today Senator for Meru County, Vice President Kalonzo Musyoka, today Deputy Opposition Leader, Makadara Member of Parliament Gideon Mbuvi, today Nairobi Senator, and former Embakasi Member of Parliament Ferdinand Waititu. Their entry into the area stirred hopes of many as they came face to face with the harshest realities of poverty and slum living, horror that drove some of them to tears.
It is unimaginable that so many people should lose lives in this way. It is terrible. Terrible, terrible.
Some people were spotted on top of the area which was reserved for the pipeline. We have been trying to remove them, but unfortunately we have not completely succeeded. But we are terribly sorry for what has happened, and the full investigations are being done, and we discuss with the Kenya Pipeline Company so that maximum support is given to the relatives and the parents and all those who have lost their people in this.
Both Raila Odinga as Prime Minister and Kiraitu Murungi as Minister for Energy promised compensation from both government and the Kenya Pipeline Company. Even as members of Parliament Mike Mbuvi and Ferdinand Waititu took the battle to Kenya Pipeline's doorstep.
My son is dead. My wife is dead. What do you want me to do? What do you want me to do?
Today, the victims and Nairobi Senator Mike Mbuvi are still in court seeking compensation. Question is, what happened to the passion shown by the rest of the leaders back then? Do they lack the requisite knowledge, mandate, or reason to make a difference? Or did they just lose interest somewhere along the way? Did they find other matters of national, maybe global importance that have to be confronted first?
I'm not happy. I think there was a lot of discussion. There was, I remember, a committee that was chaired by the then Prime Minister, Honorable Raila Odinga. And there were discussions together with the UN Habitat in terms of, these Sinai was supposed to have been, the people were supposed to be evacuated and taken elsewhere as a result of a proper slum upgrading program. But this hasn't taken place. I think it fell off in terms of the government's priority list. It did not, get the right space in terms of prioritization. So it fell off, and then you know that with different leadership teams that come into place with different development priorities. So I think we need a conversation and a continuous dialogue where the issues of urban settlements, are prioritized, especially for the people who dwell in these slums.
Hii kijiji ukianza kubana imeshika ile plot, itabani plot na itabani ingine na ingine. Lakini kama kuna ile uwezo, kuna vijana wametrainio venye wanaweza kuwa na handle na hiyo moto. Na gava inajua, na gava inatekea vijana, inaweza kuangani poa. Si ati kila saa kuangalia ngati tumedungia tizima moto. Hata hapa pana maji, watu wanaweza kama zima moto na wanazima hiyo moto. No.
Not only in fire, but just generally basic teams of disaster management and disaster response. This is knowledge that we need to consider this as important as we consider other areas, other education or training areas of our lives.
Even as the river of death stares at their doorsteps, the people of Sinai continue with their lives one day at a time, walking the same paths, eking out a living from the same valley. Is it impossible to have small income earners living in a clean and safe environment? Mukuru Sinai slum was in the late 80s a little settlement started by a handful of casual laborers who wanted to live closer to the industries. It has through the years expanded to this 100,000 people plus slum. Other than the drainage occasionally corrupted by petroleum products, Sinai is built on either sides of a major petroleum pipeline, a dangerous place to live. Residents have no legal title to the land, and so Kenya Pipeline Company has never felt compelled to provide alternative relocation options. The government, on the other hand, would not upgrade a settlement right in the heart of utilities like high-voltage power lines and petroleum pipelines. So, the Mukuru story is a battle of sorts for urban space.
A lot of these areas, especially in the slums, they are termed as informal settlements. So the government most governments don't recognize them as official dwelling places, because most of them are usually put up in areas that are seen to be protected, around perhaps waste disposal places, around rivers, around maybe it could be a power wheel for service lines. So once these areas are termed as illegal settlements because of that reason, then you find that provision of basic services like water, electricity is not there. The government are sort of torn in between a delicate balance of do you provide services when in the first place you feel that these are areas that are probably set aside for different purposes.
Losing the battle for the slums would mean the residents of Sinai and others like them become entirely destitute. It is not a battle they are willing to lose. Yet, to yield to their existence would be to accept a breakdown of social order and the rule of law. So what then is the solution that would appreciate the values, beliefs, and needs of state while protecting the basic needs and basic rights of its dislocated poor?